Well, good morning, all. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm Kent Hughes. I run a program here on America and the global economy that looks at globalization, innovation, and the long-run future of the American economy. And not accidentally on that last subject, STEM education is a prominent question that will, in no small measure, define our future. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce our new director, President and CEO, Congresswoman Jane Harman. She brings to this job a wealth of experience, 9 terms in the Congress, representing really the aerospace belt of Southern California. She has served on all the Armed Services, Homeland Security, Intelligence committees, and not surprisingly, has received a host of prominent awards thanking her for her work on the questions of national intelligence. She's a graduate of Smith College and magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, I might add. So we're all a little intimidated here at the Wilson Center.
Yeah, right.
And she's also a graduate of the Harvard Law School and brings that kind of legal acuity here to her new position at the Wilson Center. Jane, welcome, and let me turn this over to you.
Okay, well, you want me to stay here or go there?
Whatever you like.
I'll stay here. Hi, everybody. It's Monday morning. I'm proud of you. It's, you should be at the beach, but we all should be. But there are few subjects that are more important than this one. I think our future depends on this subject, and I want to thank Kent for holding an important program. And, of course, I want to thank my sons and daughters at Boeing, I'll explain, for helping, especially Rick Stevens. He's one of my larger children, and is the Senior Vice President for Human Resources and a national champion in promoting improved education in the United States. I have to explain this Boeing's mother thing. No kidding. I have 4 natural children and 4 grandchildren now. That's a great blessing. But over the years in Congress, all 17 years, I looked over the Boeing Company, which is a huge industrial force in my former congressional district in what's called the South Bay of Los Angeles. Boeing employs, I think, 23,000 workers. It better not go down, Rick. And spends more than $6 billion in supplier purchases and more than 17 million spends more than $17 million in charitable contributions in California. That's a good start. But Boeing's satellite manufacturing is in El Segundo, California. And about 10 years ago or so, there was a slight glitch in one of the programs. Of course, it's all classified, so we'll just call it a slight glitch. And the congressional representative, that would be me, got quite agitated, both about some problems with the contractor, that would be Boeing, and some of the subs, but also with how the government had handled it. And so tough love was required. It was quite a big bump. And, of course, who administers tough love? Mothers. So, right? Mothers? How many mothers know what I'm talking about? How many fathers know what I'm talking about? Okay, so fine. So that was when I became Boeing's mother. And ever since, my letters are signed Mom. And just the story that not everybody, even at Boeing, knows, which was pretty funny, was last summer. I know this is off script, Kent, but hey. So last summer, I'm on a congressional delegation to the Middle East, and we land in Lebanon for lunch. No kidding. And we were supposed to fly on to, where were we supposed to fly? We were supposed to fly on to Doha. And so we land at the airport in Beirut, and someone says, "Oh, we have a flat tire. We're grounded for 3 days because under whatever the government regulations are, it takes all this time to get a new tire." Don't ask, do we have a spare tire? No. This is, I guess, a metaphor for how our Congress is working these days. But at any rate, I say, I know what to do, and I have my trusty little BlackBerry, and I look up Jim Albaugh. Jim Albaugh is one of my Boeing children. He's also large, like Rick. And he is in charge of Boeing's commercial production. His title is
President and CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes.
President and CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes. So I dial his cell phone. It's about noon in Lebanon. It did not occur to me where he might be. And I hear, hello, hello. And I say, Jim, it's your mother calling. Oh, I thought you were my wake-up call. I said, I am your wake-up call. We're in Beirut with a flat tire. Oh, can you help? And of course, he was on the West Coast, so subtract whatever, 8, 9, no, 11, sort of middle of the night call, whatever it was, his nightmare. Anyway, to Boeing's credit, not just one, but 2 tires arrived in the same calendar day, and we could go on our way. So if Boeing can do that, Boeing can inspire the next generation of kids, and so can you, to take the STEM subjects and to become the rocket scientists of the future. There's no point in saving these high-skill, high-wage jobs. Everybody nodding here, right? If we don't have kids to fill those jobs. And you better believe it, if we can't solve this in the United States, other countries would be very happy to take this business over, and they're training more engineers than we are. On that point, by the way, plug for my old alma mater, Smith College. It still is a women's college. We don't have the 7 sister schools anymore, but we have 5 sister schools, and it's the only one that has an engineering department, which is robustly supported by the aerospace industry, which, oh, by the way, has a number of women engineers and women managers, and why shouldn't it? Right, Rick? Okay. So after Rick speaks this morning, he's leaving for the White House and a gathering of business leaders. The president is enlisting them in an effort to deal with the high school and college dropout crisis. From Rick's biography that you picked up on your way into the auditorium, you can see the array of responsibilities he's had at Boeing. He's been a leader in the industry, and before Boeing, an officer in the Marine Corps, served as the tribal chairman of the Pala Band of Mission Indians. Why not? If an Indian can be a rocket scientist, so can anyone in America. He's met all those responsibilities and all those challenges, but I think he will tell you that none of them has been more challenging and more important than the effort to make the United States the world leader in education. So, as a graduate of the LA Unified Public School System, that would be me, who went on to 2 pretty good, a very good college and a very good law school. These schools have to work for everyone. And as I've said for years and years, the best affirmative action policy in our country for anybody is a decent, quality public education, and focusing on math and sciences is absolutely critical for the U.S. to continue its leadership in the world. So this is an introduction. Yes? Did I do it? Please welcome Rick, or what are we doing now?
Yes.
Kent? Rick.
Rick is next.
Welcome, Rick. Okay.
Thanks, Jane.
Let's see, I'm not sure how to address you as Congresswoman or Mom. Both will do, I think.
Mom.
Yeah, Mom. And by the way, Mom, I too am a graduate of the LA Unified School District.
What high school did you
I
go
went to Merrill Est High School, actually up in Rolling Hills, PV, and I went to Torrance Elementary School and a junior high school there. So
It's all in my and by the way, just as the world turns, my successor is being sworn in tomorrow, Janice Hahn.
Outstanding.
So if you're in town tonight, there's a reception for Janice Hahn.
Well, thank you very much.
Stick around and come, guys. We'll
Thanks.
talk. Okay.
Well, I cannot think of a better introduction for the subject today, and it's an honor for me to be here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and particularly grateful to see the great dynamic leadership that Jane Harmon is bringing to the center as it moves forward and really works on its future. I really want to talk about this focus on education, and I'm hopefully going to push us a little bit in some of our thinking and really question some assumptions about where we've been, about where we're going, because Mom has got it right. It really is about the competitive nature that we face in our global economy, and I'll touch a little bit about that with a couple specific examples that relate to the industry that I'm in, the aerospace industry. But let me start by telling a little bit of a story. You know, in the mid-late 40s, 6 million men served in the military to protect the freedom of the United States and the world. 5 million women entered the workforce at home to build the weapons systems of World War II and stayed after in a peacetime job market. The men faced unfathomable challenges as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, merchant Marines, and Coast Guardmen. The women left families behind and placed their children in daycare. As the generation grew older, they became known as the greatest generation. They themselves had grown up in depression. They themselves had fought a war, and together they rebuilt an economy that developed into the strongest around the globe. They had no computers. They had no TV. They had themselves, their ability to work together, skills learned on a farm, their courage, and an attitude that was about possibilities. They carried America forward on the back of their labor. In 1969, 3 men went to the moon and safely returned home. Nearly 3 million men and women of that greatest generation and their children conceived, designed, built, and enabled another world-changing event. In addition to many having served the nation on foreign soils and factories, these men and women once again successfully delivered an array of services and support with the skills they had honed in rural America. In 1972, Dr. Stephen Glenn, then internationally recognized for his work in education, mental health, training, and family psychology, began what would begin to be an ongoing service to 4 presidential administrations, looking for an answer and a solution to the question is, why is it that up until 1963, every group of young people to arrive at 17 got stronger in discipline and motivation, stronger in achievement and comprehension than the group ahead of them, infinitely superior to their parents. But in 1963, that whole pattern reversed itself, and for the next 20 years, without exception, went steadily in the opposite direction. After much study across the country and nearly 3,000 research documents, what Dr. Glenn found was what has happened was what parents had done since the beginning of time. The generation that endured so much during Depression, that fought to preserve democracy and to live with so little and fight the stress and challenges of their lives during the war, decided to make abundant for their children that for which was in short supply as they grew up. And what parents have done forever, they live to regret that they had ensured their children had everything they did not have, including every possibility for opportunity they needed for success. In 1983, after years of study, A Nation at Risk was published. It stated, "Our society and its educational institutions seem to have lost sight of the basic purpose of schooling and of the high expectations and discipline effort needed to attain them." Some statistics from A Nation at Risk. Some 23 million American adults are functionally illiterate by the simplest test of everyday reading, writing, and comprehension. About 13% of all 17-year-olds in the United States can be considered functionally illiterate. Functional illiteracy among minority youth ran as high as 40%. Average achievement of high school students on most standardized tests was now lower than 26 years previous. Over half the population of gifted students did not match their tested ability with comparable achievement in school. And the College Board Scholastic Aptitude Tests demonstrate a virtually unbroken decline from 1963 to 1980. Average verbal scores fell over 50 points, and average mathematics scores dropped nearly 40. Even before The Nation at Risk was published in 1969, the National Assessment of Educational Progress data collection started. In the 1970s and the 1980s, testing to compare state and local school districts was added. In the 1980s, the term education governor was coined and the states took a stronger role. In 1986, the Carnegie Forum created a task force on teaching as profession. In 1990, the Carnegie Foundation's America's Choice, High Skills or Low Wages. In 1991, the Pew Charitable Trust and the MacArthur Foundation focused on research, development, standards, and performance assessments. In 1994, President Bush established the National Summit on Goals 2000, establishing 8 goals to improve learning and teaching, including consensus building, education standards, leadership, parental assistance, safe schools, minority-focused civics, education, educational research, and improvement. In 1995, according to the National Center of Charitable Statistics, there were 138,000 education charities with assets over $244 billion. In 2000, the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills scans was adopted, Skills for the Jobs for the Future. In 2001, the number of educational charities increased by 30,000, with the total assets doubling. 2002, No Child Left Behind came out. 2005, Rising Above the Gathering Storm was released, which Norm Augustine led. The U.S. educational system was a Hurricane 4 force. A couple years ago, 21st Century Skills came out, which is a redo of the SCANS competencies. In 2009, we had the American Recovery and Investment Act and Race to the Top. This year, we'll spend about $550 billion on K-12 education. Last year, Rising Above the Gathering Storm 2 came out and classified us as now a Hurricane Level 5. And in June of this year, the educational charities grew to a further 202,000, with assets increasing another 65% to $840 billion. Many people and programs are trying to help. Yet the most recently published academic report card for the U.S., as measured in the, again, National Assessment of Educational Progress, provides the following scores. 74% of students in their last year of high school scored at or above the basic reading level, which says 26% scored below the basic reading level. 60% of students in their last year of high school scored at or above the basics on mathematics, which is the partial mastery of the requisite knowledge to be successful. 64% of students in their last year of high school scored at or above the basic level of math, with only 26% considering proficient. And 45% of students in their last year of high school scored at or above the basic level of U.S. history, which says 55% did not. Go back 28 years and compare the results this year compared to where we were 28 years ago, not a lot of difference. The overall budget, as I talked about for K-12 education, $550 billion this year, with the total expenditures on a per student basis in constant dollars in 1965 was $3,300. Today, it's $9,000. So we've more than tripled the amount of spending in current year dollars that we're spending on education, yet the results are no better. There are countless programs at the state and local level, at the national level, with business-based organizations, schools, and many more, all wanting to help. But the truth is, we can no longer say that we are a nation at risk. We are a nation in crisis. And we talk with business leaders today looking for a workforce to meet their needs. The predominant feedback is we do not have a labor shortage, especially with unemployment at the levels it is today. The challenge is we have a skills shortage. The people with the right skills to do the jobs necessary in an ever-increasing competitive marketplace. While I would say, and most would look and say, okay, we've heard the numbers, the issues have been out for around some time, we all agree that education of our children ranks near the top of any list that we would ever have, but with all of the effort, what's happening and what should we do now? Albert Einstein once said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I contend that two very fundamental assumptions about education changed decades ago in America that directly impact the education of our children today. And until we begin to address those assumptions, until we begin to understand the core issues associated with educating our children, 10 years from now, we may find ourselves in not much better situation than we are today, or where we were in 1983 when A Nation at Risk was published. Let's talk and pause about education in America 60 years ago. What was it like to grow up as a child, and what would young adults do once they grew up and entered the workforce? Now, I won't for a moment take you back to the mid-40s, but I would like to take you back a few decades and ask all of you a few questions. How many of you had a computer when you were growing up? There's a few, yes, okay. How many of you played outside when growing up? Okay. How many of you did something that might create yourself great bodily harm when you were growing up? Okay, but you did it anyway, right? How many of you learned as much outside the classroom as you did inside the classroom? Okay. How many of you have children? Okay. The Kaiser Family Foundation recently reported that 8 to 18-year-olds devote an average of 7 hours and 38 minutes to entertaining media across the typical day, or 53 hours a week. Significantly more time than they spend in the classroom, or even riding bikes, or playing in the park, or when they multitask, they actually spend and consume 10 hours and 45 minutes worth of media in those 7.5 hours. For Hispanic or Black children, that number can be as high as 13 hours of their time. This raises two key points that I don't think we're looking at enough. First, Most people grew up before technology entered the world of daily lives where they learned the way Leonardo da Vinci did. They learned by observing and doing real things on their own. They took what they learned in their real lives outside the walls of the classroom, into the classroom, refined it, and applied it even further outside the classroom through new experiences. Life and school were completely connected. This is important when we think about the big variation in the activities young people engage in before they even start school. The education of a child starts well before they show up in the classroom. Ask any kindergarten teacher that has been teaching for some time about the quality of students entering the classroom for the first time compared to 10 years ago. Ask how many can hold a pencil well, use scissors to cut paper, or ask any sports coach how well kids can run when they play soccer or t-ball at an early age. I had the opportunity to talk to a second grade teacher down in Midland, Odessa, and asked her students, she had 2 classes, asked her kids what they got for Christmas. Very interesting. She says, "What do you want?" I said, "Just go ask and see what answers you get back." Now, she teaches in a low-income area, so the children are on free breakfast, free lunch, and certainly have many things provided for them by the school district because they can't afford them. And yet, when she asked the kids, "How many of you got toys for Christmas?" They all raised their hand. "How many of you have received money for Christmas?" About half raised their hand. "How many got over $100? Over half raised their hands. "How many of you got a piece of electronics for Christmas?" All of them raised their hands. "How many of you got Game Boys, Xboxes, or something similar to that?" About 75% raised their hands. "How many of you got books for Christmas?" 2 raised their hands. And they turned to their teacher and says, "Are we going to be in trouble?" The kids understand what's really going on and what's critically important in our education system, and it goes back to what we as leaders need to do. You'll be amazed to learn that the skill level amongst our young children, and not surprised, is dramatically going in the wrong direction. By missing real life doing, our children are missing the physical development of important elements that are needed well before they start school. In 2009, in Newsweek magazine, America's Pediatric Physical Therapy Association reported that as many as 70% of today's small children are as much as 2 years underdeveloped by age 5 compared to children entering kindergarten 20 years ago. The second key point is that there are fundamentals that must be learned by rote memory and real demonstration. School cannot be just about facts and information. With the amount of knowledge that's increasing exponentially, we cannot possibly expect our schools to keep up with the volume of information our children will need in the future. Students must learn to apply the knowledge on their own through their own thinking and their own reflection. I believe Joe Legowski at the University of Texas at Austin said it correctly when he said, "We are attempting to educate, in the case of business and higher, students today so they be ready to solve future problems that have not yet been identified using technologies not yet invented based upon scientific knowledge not yet discovered." And so all core concepts critically important for our students and what they learn. It's not the information they pack in their head in the testing, it's how they're actually able to apply it, and that's what we're looking for in the real world. Because this whole notion is, that's really what Legowski's quote was all about. I think the second important element for all of us to recognize is that in the mid-'80s, there's a very important event that occurred in Eastern Europe. The wall came down in Berlin. That's the one we focused on because it provided an opportunity for about 200 million people to have the opportunity to learn about democracy. And we've seen it grow and them enjoy that across the last couple of decades. But what also happened at the same time was the full-scale implementation of the internet, which gave about 2 billion additional people access to information that up until now had been relatively limited to what went on in the U.S. That information increased the level of opportunity for those with new access, but also for us in America, created the level of competition and the speed of innovation because of the significant number of people who would now see opportunities for commerce right here in America. Low labor prices helped create competition in the steel business, but information availability fueled competition in the automotive sector, where there were the big 3, Now there are only 2, and they are part of the 7. In heavy equipment, talk to Caterpillar or John Deere, competition is fierce. In the aviation industry, we clearly see a change with new competitors working hard to upscale their regional jets into full single-aisle aircraft to meet global market needs. And we hear about the war for information and cybersecurity each and every day. In other words, our information is critical. Others are getting it, they're using it, and they're competing against us. What does that mean for our children? No longer is a high school diploma sufficient, and no longer does a college degree guarantee a job. The nation and our children are learning that the hard way today. It is time for us to retool our approach to preparing our youth for the future, a future where competition is fierce, and we need to be straight with our kids about what it takes to go compete going forward. And as Mom would say, it's time to deliver the tough love and the tough discussions with our kids so they will get ready to be able to go forward. There is no question that we need academic standards, and there is no doubt that accountability is important. But accountability cannot be left to schools alone. We as parents, community leaders, educators, business leaders, and students all must be accountable for creating the environment for our students to learn and be ready to compete for jobs. As many of you know, I chair the Aerospace Industries Association Workforce Steering Committee. I'm a member of the Business Higher Education STEM Committee and have served on many local, state, and national panels on education focused on STEM. One of the key actions that we focused on all the organizations has been how to find the best programs that help our children develop and then ensure those programs are replicated and receive funding, and let those who do not and can't survive drop by the wayside. The fact is, as I travel around the country and as I talked about the statistics earlier on about the number of education philanthropic organizations and the amount of funding, I've concluded that is not necessarily the right strategy, because programs continue on, whether or not many support them because they have adequate funding, because everyone wants to help support STEM. So I think it's time to really look and say, what are the sorts of things that allow programs to be successful, and ensure whatever programs they are, we're putting the right resources necessary to make them successful. I think part of the challenge also, we look and say there's a STEM conference every day across the country. I know there's at least one national STEM conference going on today. There's at least one national reform conference going on each and every day. The evidence is clear. There are more organizations with more money. And we've got to figure out how we take advantage of it and alignment. And after looking at programs that have made a difference for many for the last decade and helped ensure a child is ready for the world of adulthood, there are 5 key components that I believe are critically important for success in our STEM programs and the workplace. But it also doesn't matter whether they want to be engineers, lawyers, work in a factory or clerk, or start after high school or start work after college. First, children need real-world experiences, hands-on practical skills. They have to play with and do real things, not just toys. They have to touch, manipulate, see, take apart, build with their hands, see through their eyes. They have to experience when something works and when it doesn't. We can argue about how soon kids should get after computers, and in the Stevens household, you know, my grandkids aren't allowed to see a computer or a TV before they're 5, you know, and that's because I sent all my kids off to school about what's it really take to learn. But one can have those arguments. The fact is, thumb manipulation activity is a reactive action. It cannot replace imaginative play. Kids will be at risk in the future if they do not have real experiences. And we are the ones that are responsible for helping set that tone and tenor. And there's plenty of evidence in the room. Let's see, how many of you have BlackBerries or iPhones or other phones? How many of you got your thumbs figured out? The kids will figure it out as well. That's not a problem. They can pick it up quickly. Kids need hands-on, real-world application. And I have the pleasure of being out at Wolf Trap this morning. And there's a great program out there. And I've come in and out of Washington, D.C. many times, had no idea that Wolf Trap, while a great arts institution at our national park, is really this wonderful early learning education pipeline that is just phenomenal. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly encourage it. They are doing some great things on the early learning on kids and hands-on. Second, what kids learn in school has to relate to them. If it does not, it's not real. And if it's not real, it's not applicable. And while kids memorize, they will not learn. The same concept is true for you and me. Think about our jobs, the jobs that we have. If we have the opportunity to learn and memorize something, we may learn and memorize to take the test, but if it doesn't apply to our work, what does it do? Outside the brain envelope, something else will replace it. They can pass the test, and we've got great kids passing an SAT test. The question is, can they apply what they're learning? Third, children need role models to follow. All of us in this room, I'll bet, have someone that we wanted to emulate as we were growing up. We may even have someone that we want to emulate today. Children need role models as live human beings. Dr. Renee Hobbs at Temple University in Philadelphia did a study with 8-year-old girls a few years ago and discovered that they knew more about the virtual world than Hannah Montana than their own. Now that Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus, is no longer there, what happens to the world? With what knowledge will they build their new world, the world they live in? Fourth, children need mentors. Just like we need mentors to help guide us, to steer us, and help them reflect on themselves and what they can do with what they're learning, just like Mom did a few minutes ago. Fifth, children need incentives or motivation to do better. They need to know someone is paying attention and there's some accountability to go forward, and that we can't just bail them out when there's an issue that bubbles up. There are countless activities underway around the country. Let's take a look at a couple examples that really achieve results in a different way. One example I'd like to talk about is the Santa Ana Unified School District. 5 years ago, their college readiness rate was 17%. Right next door in Irvine, California, their college readiness was 80%. Same curriculum, same teaching methods, same process. There was something going on outside the school more than was inside the school. We spent a fair amount of time looking at culturally what was going on and found out that most of the children in the Santa Ana Unified School District were Hispanic. Most of the children in Irvine were Anglo or Asian. And so we began to look and say, how do we begin to reach the students? And we said, let's go talk to the church. And through actions with the mothers, with the church, in 5 years, the college readiness rate in Santa Ana went up. It doubled from 17 to 34%, and the curriculum in the school did not change one iota. If we look at FIRST Robotics, an example of a great program Dean Kamen started with the 3,000 teams today. You know, those of us in aerospace support a lot. Why? Because it provides real-world problems. Kids have to go compete. They're incented to go compete on a national scale. If you get the opportunity next April, come down to the St. Louis Stadium, and it's amazing. You'll see 12,000 kids all competing. But not only are they competing with the robots as teams, as it occurs in the real world, the competition requires them to work together with 3 robots competing against 3 other robots. They make those assignments, they work them. But as part of them, they have mentors, they have coaches, they have people helping them along the way. And let me tell you, the statistics that come out of that program for the number of youngsters that want to pursue science, technology, engineering, mathematics careers is off the charts. Sarah Givens at Banneker Elementary School in Gary, Indiana. Now, many of you know Gary, Indiana. Some of you may know Gary, Indiana, because I thought about it from The Music Man. Many of you would also know that Gary, Indiana was the murder capital of the world up till about 3 years ago. There's an elementary school over there, Banneker, that Sarah Givens has been there for 19 years. It is low income. Kids are on free breakfast, free lunch, and take backpacks home for dinner on the weekends. This school has been in the top 10% of all elementary schools in Indiana for the last 19 years, and many of the years they've been ranked number 1. Okay? And so poor is not an excuse for not performing. Now, does she have a program? Yes, she's in every classroom every day, talking with the students, working with the teachers on a curriculum, and you walk into kindergarten classroom, as I had the opportunity to do, all the kids are sitting on the floor reading. And they're ready to stand up and talk about what's important to them: discipline, dedication, and their opportunity to grow. And they all have a sense about what their careers are, what the possibilities are. So it's not about the money, it's about leadership. The National Academy Foundation, which is a great program principally supported up out of New York, but around many different places in the country, what do they have? They have hands-on application, they have mentors, they have real programs, they have hands-on applications. Jeffrey Canada's program in the Harlem Project. While some would say it's expensive in terms of implementation, it has all the 5 elements, and the kids that will come out of that will in fact be successful going forward. Norwalk High School, another Southern California school, was ranked at the bottom of its high school class, brought in a new leader, Frank Cepeda, begin to put accountability in, but also bring the community in. Went from the worst to the best. It was ranked in the top 3 in its time period as Frank was there. These programs that I know about and many of you know about all have the same sets of attributes. These same attributes, again, hands-on, real practical application. You know, sorry about that. Hands-on, real practical application, the ability to really learn and have direct application of what goes on in the classroom, role models to follow, mentorship, and this recognition that there are incentives to go forward. That's what excites and engages our youngsters. That's what education needs to be about, but that's also about the investments that we need to make going forward. And I would contend, if we in industry, we in the community, and we who are involved in after-school programs, or those that support the community, ensured every one of our programs had those 5 elements, we could look for success and expect change going forward. Technology of all kinds can help manage and motivate humanity forward, but remember, let's not confuse sophistication and the ability to do video games with real maturity and understanding. Wisdom that leads in this future comes from human investment of time and effort, and it cannot be bought with the push of a thumb. Let's ensure, again, that all of our programs have the 5 major areas. Now, this is not an easy challenge to go work, not at all. We have huge inertia about what goes on in our education system today. But we also have the opportunity to change on what goes on around our schools, because as I talked about and used Santa as an example, there's a great example of fixing the community around, and academic achievement soars within the existing community. We have a system in place. It worked for decades and for many in lifetimes. But the fact is, the world has changed. We're much more competitive than we've ever been. And it's time for us to change, lest we find ourselves in 2039 as we find ourselves 28 years later after A Nation at Risk was written. We are a nation at crisis. We have the opportunity to respond. I hope you'll take some of these thoughts and ideas and move forward in the organizations that you participate with. Thank you very much.
Could you take a couple questions? Rick does have to be at the White House shortly, but he will take a couple questions. And before I turn to questions, I particularly wanted to recognize Ralph Regulat, who's with us today. Ralph represented Ohio for, well, more years than I can count. And he was at one point chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee that dealt with education and helped fund many of the effective programs that Rick alluded to in his speech. We had the good fortune of luring him here to the Wilson Center for several months after he left Congress, and he continues to be an advisor on our own STEM education efforts. And I also want, of course, to welcome all of you watching on the web. Now let me open it up for questions. Ralph, let me give you the first one, and then the lady in the red sweater.
One of the things that I did here as a scholar was to get a whole, bring together all these various studies, Nation at Risk, et cetera. And you know, it boiled down to one thing when you evaluated all of them, the teacher, that the key to successful education is the teacher. Now, what can we do to improve the level of teaching to attract quality, dynamic people into the teaching profession, because that's where it starts.
So Congressman, first, attracting teachers, let me comment before, while I agree teachers are important, I think it starts much sooner than that. And so while teachers are an important element and we've got to work that, I do believe we have to do more in the early learning before they even start in the classroom. Because when we talk to all the teachers today, we are hamstringing them with education with a class that isn't ready to start. So we've got to start with the parents. And I believe, not unlike, and I don't know, when I went to school, you went to school, we probably had a sex education class. I think we need the early learning class. But it goes back to the assumptions. Kids played outside. Today they don't. We got to get the kids out for real hands-on learning, then ready for the teacher. I think the challenge that we have today is this two elements that we work on attracting teachers. I've seen lots of great teachers want to come to the classroom. It's the environment they face and the support that they may or may not receive in the classroom. I would contend if we're going to make some investment like we do in business, I think we need to do more investment in leaders of school districts. Because with the right leaders in school districts, and I'll use Sarah Givens' example again back at Banneker, she is a phenomenal leader. She's attracted a set of teachers. She's helped them engage and grow. And one of the things we're looking at right now in Boeing, particularly in the Chicago Public School District area, is how can we help CPS develop better leaders so they can go to the training necessary to go forward. And I think if we do that, I think we'll go a long ways towards attracting the best teachers. No question about it. No question about it. No different than great business leaders inspire great employees, and lousy business leaders do a lousy job with employees.
The lady in red.
Thank you. This isn't a question, but a plug for FIRST. The DC Regional is always at the Convention Center in March.
Great.
So we have the first competition. This will be the third year coming up in 2012.
Now, I appreciate the comment about FIRST. There are, competitions going on regionally across. If you look at www.first.org, you'll find all the information about FIRST Robotics, a phenomenal program.
The two people in the back, the lady and then the gentleman.
Thank you. I'd just like to.
Would you wait for the microphone, please? And introduce yourself, if you would.
My name is Blair Forlow. I just completed a regional talent strategy for the business community in St. Louis, where Boeing is a big presence. And I'd just like to affirm your points for the adult workforce as well. I had the opportunity, I guess you'd say, to work with over 2,000 STEM professionals who lost their jobs during the recession. And what we found in helping them get back to work is that what they were missing were not the technical credentials, but some other important things they didn't learn in school or maybe forgot, like ability to work on teams, ability to work with people of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, ability to be flexible in new environments and so forth. So I think, and it's very hard to teach somebody who's 48 or 52 those skills. So to build a foundation on those as a child is important for lifelong productivity.
And we all got those skills playing on the playground at the park, running into the battles. We may not have agreed with how we're going to play baseball or softball or roller skate, but we figured all that out. So it's great. I'd like to make one other comment. We see an industry in terms of the folks that we're training today to go in our production operations building commercial airplanes. About a decade ago, it used to take somewhere between 6 to 7 weeks to train someone to go into our factory assembly. Today, it's taking close to 13 weeks. And because we see a completely different set of skills coming in, and we are starting with employees coming in with what's an airplane, what are the parts to it, how would you assemble it, what would it look like, these basic skills that many of us just took for granted because we had the spatial orientation as we're growing up. Many of our new employees are not saying that today. It's not that we can't get there, but we have to go through the remediation process, which says they're missing the real-world experiences early on.
Hey, gentlemen.
Rick, it's Tony Fowler from the U.S. Department of Education, and I'd like you to address the role that industry needs to play in order to achieve some of the goals that you outlined.
Yeah, Tony, great comment. It's good to see you again. I think the big role that industry has is I do believe we need to make sure that the programs that we fund and support through the charitable, philanthropic, or community work that we do, make sure that the 5 components are covered in programs that exist. Because I think when that occurs, then we round out, those activities that are going to go on in the classroom. I think many times we in industry want to try and push in the classroom, which for good right we look and say we're going to see those individuals as employees later on. But I think there's a lot of activity underway by departments of education at the national, state, and local level. We need to let them do their job. We need to help wrap around to be able to support through programs like helping develop leadership, helping them on the curriculum side, but leave the classroom to them and allow us to wrap ourselves around the programs on that side. And again, make sure they have all the right elements that I talked to.
The lady here and then the gentleman a little bit further back.
Thank you. Edie Fraser, STEM Connector. Rick, you mentioned point number 4 and point number 5 in terms of the importance of mentors and then the point of recognition and encouragement, which seem to go together. And you mentioned the National Academy, but there's so many great mentor programs and how we build and stimulate and let everyone know what mentor programs that they can tie with mentorship and sponsorship. Can you comment further on that?
So you're right there. I think there are a lot of great mentorship programs. I was at one Saturday. About 50 Boeing employees got together on the west side of Chicago and spent time with 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and high school students providing mentorship. The ones I spent were looking for what's next after high school. I always walk away with those. We can't do enough mentoring for these youngsters, particularly for those that are out. And if we just said, you know, how many kids are in school today? Well, there's probably about 60 million Americans in school in one way or the other. Surely there are 60 million adults who can help mentor youngsters work their way through, particularly those that have jobs. So anything we can do to pull those mentorship programs together, make them accessible so the kids know how to get mentors for help, I think that's all the better. And the right answers will come out of it. But I would also say I think we need to help the mentors understand that it's more than just about how do you get scholarship dollars. They need to understand the real world. These kids need to. You know, again, I'll go back to Santa Ana because I spent a fair amount of time there. We had some big discussions with youngsters about, gee, they got their first job making $6 an hour, had enough for gas money, had enough for date nights, thought they were in good shape. And kids tend to think in dollars per hour. We then said, well, what's it take to live in Santa Ana after you graduate from school? And it was $22,000 a year. They didn't make the instant connection that $22,000 is $11 an hour. As soon as you put that in there, their whole mind shift changed. They says, 11, I'm making 6, I can't get there. I better stay in school and get an education because I have a chance at a job. It's those simple techniques of mentorship that I think if we help the mentors, they'll do a far better job helping the kids.
I promised the gentleman there, and then Susan here, and this gentleman I promised, and then the lady there.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, thank you for your comment
Introduce
earlier.
yourself, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Narek Rome with Americans for the Arts. And I wanted to thank you for your comment. You mentioned the Wolf Trap Center. The program I think you're speaking to is funded in part by a federal arts and education program.
It is.
And that I think speaks to your point about the early learning and the hands-on applications of those kinds of programs. I wonder if you could speak further about that kind of experience for students in incorporating the arts in their education.
So I can't speak an awful lot about Wolf Trap. Today was my first experience. Tim Keating and the Boeing team have spent a lot of time out there, and so they're kind of, hey, Rick, we can do more out there, which after the visit this morning would fully agree. One of the challenges that I think we all face in STEM is while we face a shortage and concern about STEM workers, and if I look at the Boeing population today in aerospace, over 20% of the Boeing population is eligible to retire today. You know, do the math. You know, that tells you, oh, I'm sorry, another 5 years, another 20% be eligible to retire. So if we do the math, nearly 70,000 Boeing employees will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. Will they? No, but 5 years later, they probably will. And if we look at the pipeline today at engineering schools, over the last 6 years, the number of seats in engineering schools have gone from 360,000 to 430,000. That's the good news. Number of seats increase. The bad news is we're still only graduating 72,000 engineers a year. I would contend we need engineers, important, we need to increase the rate, but we also need people who bring other elements to the community besides the technology. Business is not made by engineering alone. And so those who work in the arts are about communications, about how to share information. We need lawyers, we need doctors, we need people who do assembly, we need all those. And I would contend, and as I go back to my own personal experience, when I was a second grader, learned to play the horn, played it for a lot of years. That's part of the skills that you learn and are directly applicable to brain development, as we now know, and directly applicable to skills can apply later on. So I'm a strong supporter of the arts. You just got to make sure that when people want to become artists, they can get a job. And I think that's the important part of the discussion is got to have a plan that's going to generate economic value for us later on. And when all students see that as the goal, they'll make the right choice.
Lady here and the Susan.
Susan Trayman with EdSite.
How you doing,
and
Susan?
Most recently, Business Roundtable. Rick, fantastic speech, fantastic analysis. I just have one question, and that is, I'm not remembering the good old days as fondly as you are. The good old days were good for men, mainly white men. And, if you look in those early years, not so many opportunities for women, still segregated schools for African Americans. So I think we've got to be careful to not think that going forward means replicating the past. And I'm interested in your comments.
Yeah, you raise a great comment, and my inference was not to say going forward is about replicating the past at all. All I was trying to do was reflect that the past had some assumptions in it that said we were outside engaged in the real world, and we have to couple that then with our school experiences, and then we can go forward. And so I think we need for all children to be able to have those opportunities to be outside. And being Native Americans, having spent a fair amount of time on the reservation, I well understand the differences that occur with ethnicity and or gender, and the mentorship programs we need to have, and this engagement needs to recognize we need to give all students great opportunities. But as related to that, when I look at Banneker Elementary, it's an all African American school, phenomenal performance. And so it can, in fact, happen, but it has to relate to the leaders in the communities go forward. And so I really appreciate your comment, and I appreciate the clarification. It's not go back to the past. It's go forward with the set of environments that really help our kids be successful. Thanks.
The gentleman here in the second row.
Hi, Rick. I'm Pete McCluskey.
Yeah, Pete.
I headed the electronic industries for 24 years before I retired, and I'm involved now with a program called Study Buddy Help. And what we do is we connect honor students, starting now in math, with struggling students over the internet for free help on demand. It's kind of an incredible program when you think about it, but it has a lot of the elements that you're talking about. It's role models, it's example, it's mentoring, and we're looking at expanding that program to all of the STEM disciplines and bringing in adult supervision as well. Right now it's peer tutoring. I'd love to talk to you about the program offline sometime. I've already talked to Jim Albo. He's very interested in it.
Great.
And hi, Ralph. But,
Super.
I don't know when would be a good time to do that. We can do it
find time.
virtually. Okay.
I'm not sure we'll find it today, but we'll find time.
I think then the lady, the distinguished lady in the third row. Good to see you, Paula.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here. My name is Paula Stern,
Paula.
and this morning I'm representing the National Center for Women in Information Technology. And I would like to ask you to weave together your elements of success with, thank you, Susan, your comments, but with particular regard to information technology and computing. I'd like to kind of ask your reflections on the importance of what is different today, that we do have the internet, as you pointed out in your speech. We do have, which is, and sotto voce, you suggested also the electronic games, et cetera, are part of the problem. So we have a situation where technology is part of the solution and it's also part of the problem. I'd like you to reflect on that, but before I want to get my plug in for the National Center for Women in Information Technologies program that does combine all of your elements. It's an aspiration in computing program that encourages young women and underrepresented minorities. After 3 years of just getting started on this, we have a pipeline of 6,000 young women who do participate are judged online, mentored online, and then very much personally rewarded for their contributions and thoughts. And this is often in the case where there is no computing or information technology offered even in the curriculum throughout here. By 2012, we expect to have and touch 10,000 young women every year. And to the extent to which we can get this, we've talked with some of your people at Boeing, but we would love to get your personal attention given the passion you've obviously demonstrated in your career. So
Well, I appreciate the comment. I think the challenge that we have is we've got to cover about 2.5 million women. You know, there's the challenge. And
We
so
have the
scaling
numbers.
from 10,000 to 2 million, I think
Absolutely.
is where the opportunity rests. And I think we have a lot of work to do in that area. I do believe that's the challenge that we have. You know, we don't have a good mechanism today, and this is maybe where the state school superintendents, the state school officers can maybe help find out and really marry up what schools really have good mentorship for the kids and which ones do not. Because we really do have to cover, you know, the 50 million kids that are in school, you know, each and every year at kind of this K through 12. And my sense is, and we know, and part of the discussion over the White House today is what's going on at the Grad Nation and the number of high schools, about 2,000 of them, that are the dropout factories. And we got to spend some time there. And so we've got to work all of those and make sure that pipeline's going through. I think, and you know, I'll be happy to connect you up with our CIO, Kim Hammonds, a woman, leads up she's our Chief Information Officer, highly passionate, has a daughter going through the same path and plan, Zoe. And so I really think it's a matter of helping the youngsters see what the possibilities are and moving them forward. I am, as you hear, have a much stronger bias towards human interaction than on the computer, because that's where the relationships get built. Businesses operated that way. Our government operates that way. Our youngsters need to operate that way, and we got to help them do that. So for me, it's a call. We got to get to the kids early on to be able to help them move forward.
We go to the gentleman there in the middle, and then the lady in the blue dress here in the distinguished third row.
Thank you. John Yokelson, Building Engineering and Science Talent. Rick, you didn't mention research evidence as part of the filter for deciding what to support. Where do you see research evidence coming into this picture?
You really raise a good point, and I would have to say I've been one who's been on the pulpit about let's make sure we have the research and the evidence to support the decisions we're making. I think that's good for those making investments to have the evidence-based research that says it really makes a difference. But I got to tell you, over the last year or two, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of people have good ideas. Some of them are based upon a Keplerian approach rather than hard research. Those of you familiar with Kepler, you know, and really being an observational research, has really come to the conclusion that says, if we see it and it works, let's do it. And we don't necessarily need to invest in the hard, did we keep the numbers, all the information that says whether it worked or not. But Kepler was really about, let's press forward in that area. And I've concluded there are so many programs, while as a Marine, as a mathematician, and as a computer scientist, I like to get things in nice, neat order. The reality is our society is a lot more messy than that. And so having a set of criteria that we can say, these are the 5 things we really need to have in programs, my sense is a better way to approach it, because that's what reality is going on. You can go talk to every company, large or small, around this nation or every community, and everyone has their program. Everyone, and you say, but there's this better one over here. They says, well, mine's good enough. And so then you say, therefore, if yours is good enough, then let's give you what are the sorts of things you need to have to go forward. But I'm with you. I think research is all the way to go, but I think reality is it's not happening. And therefore, how do we take all of those programs and make sure they can be successful and let the funding determine whether a program survives or not? And it may be an individual supports an individual. It may be an individual supports 1,000. It may be a group supports 100,000. But if they can all be successful on who they're trying to impact, then I think we'll be successful.
I think the lady in blue was next, coming from your other side there.
Hi, my name is Anna K. Yagubian. I'm from the American Association of University Women. And my question just has to do with sort of once young women accomplish sort of going through the pipeline and have made it into industry, they are still facing a certain amount of discrimination and chilly climate, as we brought up in our recent research report of March of last year, Why So Few. And I was just wondering if you had any observations or opinion on some of how to deal with that in a corporate environment, and what you feel like is important to impart upon them, and some of the ways in which maybe best practices can be shared and things can happen in order to lessen some of those issues.
Yeah, it's a great question. I can give you my experience from the Boeing company is probably the best because when I look at the demographics we have in Boeing, we'll hire about 40% women, population about 51% women, but 40% is a huge step up from where we've been in the past. When I look at, and we categorize people in professional P1 through P6, P1 the earliest, P6, you see the numbers go down over time. Then there's this step up to the managers, non-executives, and then this step up to the executive managers. We're running about 1/4% of our executive leaders are now women, which I think we're making some great progress. We have affinity groups, which is an important part of our global diversity activity, where affinities get together, whether it's based upon gender, whether it's based upon race, backgrounds, and that's made a huge difference for people to be able to share their perspectives on how to be able to go forward. And the more and more we have groups like affinity groups, and the more and more leaders make a conscious decision that when we bring slates together, we actually look at a broad base of potential candidates for promotion, and as more women and minorities perform, the better chance we have of being able to move it. And we are moving the ball. It never moves fast enough. But the good news is we are seeing some progress, and it goes to the great work. I'll at least tell you within the Boeing team, we've got some great leaders pulling very hard to make that work, and we've got some phenomenal role models. If I just look at our commercial airplane business, if we look at the 747 program, led by a woman, 767 program, led by a woman, 737 build more airplanes than all of our other programs combined in the Boeing company, led by a woman. So if you look at the major programs, that's 3 out of 5. Not too bad as some terrific role models going forward. But I think affinity groups and recognition is the right way to go.
I'm afraid we're going to have to make that the last question. I don't want to make Rick late for the White House, but I do want to invite him back again. We've been hoping to get him here. Thanks to Tim Keating and Bob Vilhauer, who made this possible. And I also want to thank Liz Byers and Clark Taylor, H.K. Lee and Erica Pincus, who worked hard to make this all possible. And now please join me in a round of applause for an absolutely inspiring session.